From the News Channel 5 Network, this is SportsLine.
Hey there, SportsLine on your television. Steve Layman here with you. Glad you are here with us on this Tuesday night on News Channel 5 Plus. We got a big show ahead of you tonight. We're going to talk some Predators and Blues. Game 1 of that series tomorrow night in St. Louis. Drop the puck just after 7 o'clock. We'll hear from some of the Predators players as they get set for what should be a very different feeling and looking series than round 1 when it was just up and down the ice against the Blackhawks. You would think a more challenging one, too, than the 4-game sweep and beatdown that the Preds put on the Hawks. We'll get to those guys coming up here. Also, we are 2 days away from the start of the NFL Draft. Both Titans GM John Robinson and head coach Mike Mularkey talked to the media today. We'll hear from them coming up throughout the course of the show as well. Plus, Robbie Stanley will join us to talk some more hockey to preview this series. And Joseph Newgarden, Hendersonville native, wins the IndyCar Grand Prix of Alabama over the weekend. His 4th career win, 2nd time at the track. We were able to catch up with him after the win as well. So you'll hear our full interview from the Electric Power Company's Sunday Sports Central with Joseph Newgarden coming up throughout the course of the show. We would also love to hear from you guys tonight. 737-7767 is the number. And let's get into some of the discussion of some of those things. Let's start with the Preds getting set for this game tomorrow night in St. Louis. This will be a very different looking series. I can promise you that. The Blackhawks are a fast skating team, all about puck possession. Not a particularly physical team, though. The Predators matched up with them very well, especially with the guys that they put on the ice in that series. It'll be very curious for me to see what Peter Laviolette does in terms of his lines here. In round 1, the lineups he put out there with guys who are fast and can skate and possess the puck were the absolute perfect matchups to go up against the Chicago Blackhawks. I don't think those lines will be as effective against the Blues. You're talking about a team that is incredibly heavy, very physical. Pietrangelo, Parayko, Baumeister. Those guys, all on the back end especially, are just big, physical defensemen. This is a team that is going to muddy it up. They're going to push you around. You're going to have to battle here. I don't know if speed will win it for you. It'll help, but I think at some point you're going to be able to have to push back in this series. And I'm curious if the Preds go with the line that got them there, so to speak, the lines that got them there and played so well in the Chicago series, or if they adjust right from the start. Today at practice, we saw both Vern Fiddler and P.A. Parenteau on the ice with presumably your lines for tomorrow night, although there's no Craig Smith on the ice yet. Who knows what his status for this series is. And today, Calle Jarnkrok was not on the ice. I'm not as worried about that one in the sense that Calle Jarnkrok did not practice ahead of the Chicago series until the day of the game and then went out there and played fairly well throughout the series. So I think he's going to give it a chance to go tomorrow night. Smith, though, is much more of a concern. But does that mean one of those guys or both of those guys find their way into the lineup in this series after combining to play just 1 game against Chicago? We will find out. They are guys who match up much more favorably against a heavy team like the Blues than against a speedy team like the Blackhawks. Very interested to see the chess game between the coaches in terms of their lineups in this series and how it plays out, because at least for the Predators, Peter Laviolette dialed up the right thing at the beginning of the series against the Blackhawks, and it worked so well he never had to adjust. The Preds just played so incredibly well and dominated that series from start to finish. You never had to see that in-series adjustment where, okay, they did this last game and it worked for them. What do we do to come back and combat that? Just didn't have to happen for the Preds in round 1. It's unlikely, though, you can go through the entire Stanley Cup playoffs with that being the case. So here you're facing a team that's the hottest team in hockey since February 1st. What are the adjustments? that the Preds make either at the start of the series or as the series moves along, I think that'll be very key and very interesting to watch out for as well. We mentioned the Blues, red hot team. They fired Ken Hitchcock back on February the 1st. Longtime head coach, had a lot of success in this league. They fired him because they'd only won 24 of 50 games at that point. They were sitting on the outside looking in at the Western Conference playoff picture, and they replaced him with coach-in-waiting Mike Yeo. Yeo changed the defensive system. He made them more defensive in St. Louis with those big, brawny D-men that they've got on the blue line. And it worked wonders for St. Louis. In their final 32 games of the year, the Blues gave up just 60 goals. Think about that. They gave up 60 goals in their final 32 games. That's less than 2 goals a night. That defense has been terrific, and Jake Allen has been the best goaltender on the planet since February 1st. Absolutely terrific down the stretch of the season. Good again in round one. His just over 1 goal a game average and .956 save percentage, it's kind of off the charts for the playoffs and would have been the best first-round effort by anybody, except for the fact that Pekka Rinne was even better in the first round. The Predators goaltender with a .976 save percentage through 4 games against the Blackhawks. Couple of shutouts, just .7 goals against per game. Just an outstanding performance by Pekka. And you're going to need him to continue to do that in this round because this figures to be a series where goals are few and far between, where everything is difficult to come by. And so the Preds are going to have to grind in this series, and they're going to have to play good defense, and Pekka Rinne is going to have to be at his best once again. We'll get to their thoughts coming up throughout the program tonight. Also, Robbie Stanley to help break down this series. Phone lines are open. 737-7767 is the number. Let's go to Tiffany. Tiffany, good evening. You start us off here tonight.
Good evening, Steve. Like, talking about the Predators and the Blues matchup, okay, like, Layman is a mad scientist when he comes to, the lineups and everything. I just, think about, everybody talking about the big size, how big they are. And I just hate to say, hurt the friends, try to, hurt them physically, but the Blues made it to the second round. The Minnesota was nothing like as hard to play against as Chicago was. So the Preds just need to hold on to their flag, keep their confidence, and just focus on the game. And I really believe that they can win this series.
Yeah, Tiffany, I'm with you. I mean, I think a lot of people out there saw what the Preds did in round one to the Blackhawks and now make them a favorite in this series and maybe a favorite in the Western Conference. That's how impressive they were in round one. But it'll be really interesting here because you're talking about the team that's been the hottest of any team in the playoffs, that's the Predators, against the team that's basically been the best team in hockey since February 1st.
Right.
What gives here? I think that's the matchup that people need to be talking about.
Right. Well, I just believe that the Predators can pull it out because the Blues didn't sweep Minnesota. And Minnesota, they weren't good, but they wasn't like Chicago. You know what I'm saying? So I really believe that the Preds can pull this out if they just keep their same game.
Yeah, I'm with you, Tiffany. I appreciate the call. I think a big key for the Preds in this series is how do you start? Back in the Chicago series, I said it on this show, I had the sneaking suspicion that the way they played down the stretch and the way the Blackhawks kind of coasted into the postseason, not having to play for much at the end of the regular season, I had the sneaking suspicion that the Preds would be able to go in and steal game one. Now, at that time, I thought that would wake up the Blackhawks. They'd be able to flip the switch and make it a very competitive series, probably even come back and win the series after losing game one. But I thought the Preds would win game one of the Blackhawks series, and they did. And they really took control right then. And then when they won game two, it was complete control of the series. These first 2 games, Wednesday and Friday night in St. Louis, pose a similar opportunity. You don't have home ice advantage. That hurts. But if you can steal one of these two games, now all of a sudden you have home ice advantage. And if you hold serve on your ice, where the Preds have just been fantastic in the playoffs dating back to last season, you win the series at that point. Being able to come away with at least one of the two in St. Louis is absolutely massive. I don't think you're going to catch the Blues napping like maybe you did Chicago in game number 1. But I also think the Preds are ready to go. I don't think they're intimidated by the road anymore. They've kind of figured out that bugaboo throughout the course of the year. And I think they're a confident team that feels like they can match up with anybody they would face in the Western Conference for sure. They're very familiar with St. Louis and what they'll have to go against. They didn't feel like they changed that dramatically in the one time they played them with Mike Yeo as a coach. Preds thought they performed better than the outcome that day when they lost back on the first Sunday of April. That was a second of a back-to-back where they played Minnesota the day before and just maybe didn't have a lot left in that, got a couple bad breaks in there. And St. Louis played well in a big game for both teams. That, frankly, is probably the game that makes the difference between home ice advantage in this series. So you can rely on that, but the Predators said for sure it doesn't seem like it's that different of a team. Maybe a little bit more defensive-minded. Allen's playing great, but they still view the Blues as very much a team that they've played many, many times in recent years as a division rival and not some new creation under Mike Yeo. We'll see how that plays out when they get into this series. One thing's for sure, I think you can count on this being a much more hotly contested battle than what we saw in round 1 from the Chicago Blackhawks. All right, we got to take a break. When we come back, we will get to Robbie Stanley, NHL.com writer, to help us break down this series. Predators and Blues. We'll talk about that. Get a preview coming up on the other side. Plus more of your phone calls. Lines are open. 737-7767 is the number. Stay tuned. You're watching SportsLine right here on News Channel 5+.